Hey everybody, welcome back to Living Traditions Homestead. Well, we are out in the hay barn today because it is an unusually warm, but also unusually windy day here in the Ozarks. And so we decided to move into the hay barn because it's so nice we don't want to be inside, but we needed to get out of the wind for a while. So we wanted to take some time to talk to you guys today about a subject that's been coming up kind of recently in our personal lives. And we've realized that we've never really talked about it much here on YouTube. So we wanted to take some time to talk to you guys today. And that is kind of the what would you do if question that happens around homesteading.
And we're going to be talking today about, well, a little bit about like the things that most people would think about. Like what would we do without water, or, you know, what would we do without electricity? You know, those kinds of things that are on a lot of people's minds. But there are also some things that the average person probably wouldn't think about.
Right. Like,
that we're going to talk about.
Right. Like what would we do if, you know, we could no longer get hay for our cows? Or
Right.
What would we do if the feed store, you know, didn't have feed anymore?
And what would we do if we didn't have fuel?
Right. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is the feed and hay issue. Because that is the subject I think that comes up the most as we're talking to people in our everyday lives, and even questions that we get here online. So the real truth is that the solution to the feed and hay problem would be ultimately just about the same, and that is that we would need a lot less animals here on the homestead.
Right.
We would need to get to a number that we can effectively produce all of the feed that we would need for all of the animals that we have.
Currently, we have more animals on our homestead than we need to feed our family.
Right.
We have way more cows than we need, way more chickens, pigs, all that kind of thing. And we
Right.
have those on our homestead right now because we use them to sell their babies.
Right.
And that's part of our business plan. That's part of how we generate income for our family.
Right.
But in a situation where a lot of things are happening, we can't get food for them, we can't have our hay cut, at that point, we need to scale way back so we are only growing and raising enough food to support our family.
Right. And that's a situation I think that, you know, there's lots of things that could make that scenario happen. So we're not going to get into specifics about what we think might happen because really none of us know.
Absolutely.
Let's just kind of be in agreement that there are things that could happen in the world that would make it hard to get feed, hard to get fuel, hard to get food, all of those things. It is a possibility, and it's something that you should at least always have in the back of your mind. So first, let's talk about the hay issue by itself. So let's assume that we can no longer cut and bale the hay that we need here on our farm. Now, all of you know, or most of you probably know, that even though we grow our own hay here on the farm, we actually have a neighbor who comes and cuts and bales that hay for us. So let's assume for whatever reason, he can no longer come and cut that hay for us, and we're left with a hay field, but no way to cut and bale that hay. The first thing that we would need to do is we would need to downsize the amount of cattle that we have here on the homestead. Right now we have about 20 head of cattle between our beef cows, their calves, our bull, our dairy cows. All of that is about 20 head of cattle that we have here on the homestead. So we would need to get that number down considerably in order to be able to continue to survive and to be able to have those cattle graze all year long.
And we think that we would end up keeping our beef bull, 2 cows, 2 beef cows, and 2 dairy cows.
Right.
Now, the reason we would keep 2 dairy cows is, first of all, we would want one in milk all the time if we could time it right.
Right.
And because those milk cows would need to switch to being 100% grass-fed, their production is going to be a lot less than it is right now.
Right.
Because we supplement with grain.
Right.
So we would end up having 5 total cattle on our property versus 20.
Right. And really our property could probably handle about 30 head of cattle, maybe even a few more if we really wanted to push it. But
30 cattle if we could bale the hay.
Right, and fertilize and,
Right.
and all of that, because, you know, we fertilize our hay field every year because it about doubles the amount of
Right.
hay that we can get. So we're assuming also that if we can't cut and bale, we also can't fertilize.
Right, absolutely.
So we would get a lot less hay than we normally would. So our plan would be to downsize the cattle and then to leave the hay in our hayfield as what's called standing hay, which
Right.
basically means you let the grass die while it's long and you put the cattle out there in the winter and they can eat the standing hay out of the hayfield all winter long.
Right, so we would still have our pastures that we could rotate the cows through
Right.
during the warm parts of the year. We would leave the hay in the hayfield as standing hay and move those cows into the hayfield over the winter, and that's how they would feed over the winter. Now, the good news for us in Missouri, especially southern Missouri, we don't get a lot of snow,
Right.
so we don't need to worry so much about heavy snow load either trampling down or covering the hay.
Right.
The cows will be able to continue eating for most of the time.
Right. So that would be our plan for hay if we could no longer get the hay cut and baled.
Right.
Now, feed, again, the solution is very close to the same. We would get rid of a lot of our animals. And this is something that may come to a surprise to a lot of you. There are some animals on the homestead that we would actually eliminate 100%.
Right.
And honestly, the first one to go would be our pigs. As much as I love the pigs and as much as I enjoy raising them, they are our #1 consumer of commercial feed here on the homestead. Even though we raise Idaho pasture pigs that a lot of people think, consume a lot less feed, the truth is if you are raising them for meat and you want to raise them to a decent size, they still need to eat quite a bit of feed every single day.
Yes. Now, the birds during the warm times of the year, they can forage, they can eat bugs and worms and those types of things. The rabbits consume so little that during the warm time of the year, we can have them on the grass, moving them every single day. And during the winter part, I think that actually through our greenhouse, we would be able to keep a breeding pair alive and healthy by what we could grow for them
Right.
over the winter.
Right. There would be certain things we would grow in the greenhouse, like kale and chard and things like that, that we could feed them all winter long
Right.
in the greenhouse to keep them alive.
Right.
They probably wouldn't thrive the way they do now. None of the animals probably would, but we would be able to keep them alive, and really that would be the whole purpose of what we were doing at that point.
Right, and if we reduced our flocks of birds down enough that we only had what we needed for our family, it would be a small enough number that we could also grow the corn that they would need to
Right.
get them through the winter, to sustain them enough until summer came and they could go out and forage.
Right. Another animal that we would really have to consider whether or not we kept here on the homestead would be the quail that I raise. I'm experimenting and going to keep doing some experimenting with different ways to feed them without commercial feed. I'm not really ready to share all of that with you guys, but I've got some plans that I'm going to be testing out, and if it's all successful, I'll be happy to share with you guys how I'm going to try to raise quail without commercial feed, so stay tuned for that.
So in a nutshell, that is how we would get our homestead through with our animals without having bales of hay and without having commercial bagged feed. While we're on the topic of food or feed for the animals, let's kind of switch a little bit to talk about food for us.
People feed.
Yeah. Even though we do store some food and some non-perishables like many of you do,
Right.
at some point, you guys, those are going to run out, and we need a plan for what we're going to do. What are we going to do for the foods that we can't grow here? Specifically, wheat berries for flour, rice, what did we else talk about?
Sugar.
Oh yeah, sugar, and we talked about salt.
Right.
And the main solution to that in our minds is really to, number one, live without those things, and number two, rely on substitutes that we can grow well here so
Right.
that we don't need to rely on wheat and rice and purified sugar.
Right. So, it's nice in your head to think that you could just grow all of these things, right? Could we grow wheat here in southern Missouri? Could we take up part of our hayfield and grow wheat instead? Probably.
Right.
Is it is it really feasible for the two of us? You know, we have one daughter who is off at college and our other daughter is getting really close. So really, at this point, it's the two of us here on our homestead. Is it feasible for the two of us to really do that? Probably not.
Right.
You know, could we grow sugar cane and do all of the processing of sugar? Probably. Is it feasible? Probably not. So we're just going to assume that we don't have those things anymore. And like Sarah said, the real solution is then to find alternatives to those things that you can produce, or what a lot of people just don't want to hear is that you're going to have to live without it.
Right. You know, regarding the sugar, the easiest replacement for sugar is honey. But you guys, we don't have beehives. We don't have them yet. We've tried them once. It didn't work out. We'd like to do it again in the future, but we just haven't gotten there yet. So if we wanted honey, we would need to team up with somebody in the community and maybe do some trading.
Right.
Or what does grow well here, we have done it, not a whole lot in the recent past, but stevia grows very well here. So we could rely on stevia. It's
Right.
not quite the same, but hey, if you need something sweet, stevia is definitely sweet.
Right. And, you know, as far as, you know, breads and those types of things, if we don't have wheat, we're just going to have to rely more on cornbread
Right.
and things like that we can grow. And we're just going to have to do the best that we can. And really, that's what all of you are going to have to do if a situation arises where, you know, it's harder to get things that you need.
Right.
Now, another big one that comes up a lot is salt. So many people are concerned, what are you going to do without salt? And I agree that it is something you should be thinking about. And it's something that really, there's no way to produce.
Right.
You can't grow it in a greenhouse. You can't grow it in the garden. I mean, you can't, around here, you can't go mine it in your own
Right.
backyard.
Right.
I mean, so salt is something that we would have to think about. And the real truth to that is, you guys, even though prepping or being a preparedness person has kind of gotten a bad rap, you're going to have to be prepared on some things, and salt is one of those. But let's be realistic about it. If you're just using it for seasoning your food and things like that, if you could have 50 pounds of salt stored up, that's a lot of salt,
Right.
and that's going to get you through a lot of times. That would even make it through an entire tomato season for me. But you guys, you're going to have some things on hand, the things that you absolutely can't produce. And you're going to have to determine. Now, I know some people want to preserve all of their meat by salting it and things like that. Well, you have to think about that ahead of time, and you have to have all of that on hand.
You either are not going to do that,
Right.
or you're going to prepare ahead of time so you have enough on hand to do those things.
Right. You know, that's not something we want to do. We would can all of our meat if we needed to preserve all of our meat that way. So we would just need enough salt on hand to have for eating and cooking.
So the next topic is water. What would we do if we couldn't get water? Well, the first thing is, really here in Missouri, especially in southern Missouri, there is just a lot of natural water, ponds, creeks, streams, that kind of thing. And on our property, we do have access to fresh water, which is fantastic. Some other alternatives that are available to us, most wells can be converted to be used with solar.
Right.
We do have solar options. We also have a kind of a shallow well that still is in existence that we plan to put a hand pump on.
I think the biggest thing is going to be, at least for us, not so much the availability of water, because we do have a lot of water available. It'll be whether or not it's contaminated and if we have a way to purify it. So obviously the easiest way to purify water is just to boil it. But being kind of the preparedness mindset, we also have ways that we can filter water. There's a lot of options out there that you guys can use for filtering water, like a Alexapure or a Berkey filter. So you guys should, you know, look into some of those and see what you think is the right thing for you. And, you know, you should have something on hand, even if it's just making sure you always have a way to be able to boil water if you need it. Now, Sarah had touched on just a minute ago about the ability to switch a well over from running on electric to running on solar. And that is something that also comes up a lot, because a lot of people say, well, I know you have a well, but, you know, if the power goes out, your well's no good. Well, there are ways around that, and Sarah touched on that, converting the well from electric to solar. And so I wanted to take a second to talk to you guys a little bit about the electric aspect of what our plan would be if we no longer had electricity here on the homestead. I've showed you in the past that we have a solar generator that we use here on the homestead. It's one that I've used to power my shop in the past, and it has come in handy several times for, you know, power outages and things like that. But we also just recently got another solar generator, and this is one that I'm really happy with, and I want to show it to you guys and talk to you a little bit about why I think it's a really good solution. So this is the latest solar generator that we've got. Basically, what a solar generator is a battery bank. And what this battery bank can do is power lots of different things around the homestead. Now, we have several different sizes of solar generators here on the homestead, but like I said, this is the most recent one we got. It's made by a company called EBL. We've used it a couple times already. We had a brief power outage just recently, and we were able to use this to continue to run lights and things like that inside the house. This is a 1,000-watt solar powered generator, so it's got a battery inside of it. It came with two solar panels, so during the day we can charge this up. The power gets stored inside of here, and then overnight or whenever we need it, we can use this to plug in lights. This one actually has a built-in light right on the front, which is kind of nice. But you can use this to run AC and DC things in your house. So it's got a wireless charger on the top for your cell phone. It's got regular outlets here on the front. It's got USB ports. And what I've really been using this one for, because it's so portable, it's really light, is that I can throw this on the front of the ATV or in the UTV. Between this and a solar panel, I can run, you know, I can charge batteries for tools and things like that all day long while I'm working remotely, and it has really come in handy to have this solar generator that is so portable. One of the really handy things about this is that it has these really portable solar panels. You can see they just fold out, and then there's a stand on the back that unfolds, so you can set these on the ground wherever you're working and charge the power station itself. So you guys, I'll leave a link to this one in the description of the video, but there are a lot of them out there. This one, I can tell you, has worked flawlessly, so it is something that I would recommend. You know, I wouldn't recommend something if we hadn't already tested it out for you guys, but depending on what you need to do, a little one like this that is portable really comes in handy to have.
The bottom line is, for electricity for us, is that we understand that life is not going to be the same without electricity.
Right.
Even if we have solar to kind of enhance our life, it's not going to completely replace everything that we currently use electricity for.
Right.
And that's just something that we understand. We know it's going to be a harder life. We're so happy to have some alternatives to make things a little bit easier and more comfortable for us
Right.
through using these solar generators. And that's just, you know, what's going to be for us if the power goes out and there's no electricity.
Right. And really the way I think of like the solar generators is that they're kind of a bridge. You know, they give us some time between when we lose electricity. You know, hopefully we're never going to have a time where the power doesn't come back on. So let's just say we're out of power for a week. We can survive. We can even run our freezers off some of the bigger solar generators that we have to get us through a time like that. But let's just say, for whatever reason, there's a time when, you know we're not going to get power back on for 10 years.
Right.
Well, these solar generators, while they will last 10 years, you know, we're not going to live our everyday life for 10 years on just these generators. But what they do is they give us a bridge. They give us time to can all of the meat that we have in our freezers. They give us time to figure out how to live more and more without electricity. Right. And they're just kind of a bridge, for lack of a better term, to get us through.
Absolutely.
So the last topic that we want to talk about is fuel. Specifically, we're talking about gas and diesel, because those are the two fuels that we use here on the homestead. So what would we do if the day comes when we can't, fill up the gas cans that we normally take to town and fill up for the things that we use around the homestead? This is something we've also thought about.
Right. Well, you might be kind of noticing a common theme here. If we don't have a way to get more fuel, then we will use what we have very sparingly and reduce the activities that we normally do that use fuel, so that we have to use them less or not at all.
Right. So, we were talking about this before we started recording, and it's like, well, what would we do about going to town? Well, if there's a fuel shortage, going to town is probably the least of our worries.
Right.
So I would have whatever fuel is in my truck to be able to use around the farm instead. I could siphon it out and I could, use that around the farm instead. But there are also things that I think about in my daily life, like right now, if it's really rainy and cold, a lot of times I'll either jump in the UTV or the ATV to go feed the animals in the morning because I can get them done faster. But that uses fuel.
Right.
And if I had to, I would just walk every day like I do on the nice, sunny, warm days to go feed the animals. So there are little things that we would do that would definitely reduce our need for fuel a lot.
Right.
And then there are things that, right now we use fuel for because it's really handy. Like, I love my tractor. You guys know that I use my tractor for a lot of things. But, if we couldn't use the tractor to till the garden, what would we do?
Right. Well, we would just have to find alternate ways to either till our garden, like use a broad fork, or we would find ways to grow that don't require tilling the garden.
Right.
We have a lot of big tubs, and we can continue growing inside the greenhouse or outside the greenhouse in those tubs.
Right. So just like all of the other subjects that we have discussed, fuel is one of those where, we would just have to shift our thinking about
Right.
it. We would need to use what we do have on hand very sparingly.
Right.
So we could, get through some time and then get used to not having it at all.
Right. We would have to go back to the old ways.
Right.
Before tillers, before tractors,
Right.
before lawnmowers and weed eaters. We'd have to do it the old-fashioned way.
Right. And you guys, again, I know being prepared sometimes gets kind of a bad rap, but there are things you need to think about.
Right.
And you do need to take the time while you still can to get things that, will help make your life easier if some of the really nice things in life start to go away.
So you guys, we hope that this topic and our explanations and some of our plans have been helpful to you. We hope that you've enjoyed hearing kind of what we would do, and maybe it will give you guys some ideas to kind of get prepared, even just in your thinking, not necessarily always about beans and rice,
Right.
but to start having that planning thought process about, what would we do
Right.
if this happened?
Right. And, we really hope that the day never comes
Absolutely.
when, any of these things happen. We hope that the feed store will always be there. We hope that the gas station will always be there. And, we're not the type of people to sit around and just dwell on, how these things might play out. We live our life, but we do like to always have a plan in the back of our minds for the what-ifs.
You guys, we're so happy that you joined us today for this just kind of sit-down discussion. If you're enjoying our videos and topics like this, make sure that you hit the subscribe button below if you're not already a subscriber. And remember that the best way that you can help us here on the Homestead is just to share our videos in your social media. Until next time, thank you so much for stopping by our homestead. Take care, and God bless.
God bless.